The drone of my old pickup's engine was a hollow thrum on that Christmas Eve, not the usual crunch of snow, for there was little that year, just a whisper of frost painting the cobblestone streets of Oakhaven in silver under the lamplight. No, the sound I remember was the terrible final grind of my tires as I made a U-turn, a movement that felt like tearing a page from my own life story. The text message glared from the dashboard, its stark words slicing through the festive glow of the town. The traffic light at the intersection cycled through green and red twice before the blare of horns behind me jolted me back to the present. Do not come until you apologize to Victor Sterling. 14 words, no greeting, no explanation, no season's cheer. Just a chilling directive that seemed to erase 15 years of quiet effort, 15 years of trying to be the kind of father who never forced his child to choose. My hand hovered over the phone, fingers trembling. I typed nothing. I simply shifted the gear, eased the truck into a slow arc, and headed back to an empty house overlooking the churning winter sea. But I'm getting ahead of myself, as old men often do when memory plays tricks with time. The true beginning, the quiet genesis of that Christmas Eve unraveling, actually started 6 weeks earlier, tucked away in my small sea-scented workshop. For nearly 4 decades, I'd been Arthur Thorne, a restorer of antique telescopes. It's a craft that teaches patience, a deep respect for history, and the quiet understanding that the most profound truths are often hidden, obscured by time or neglect. When you meticulously clean an old brass lens, polishing away the grime of years, you eventually reach a point where the metal stops being just an object and starts feeling like a repository of forgotten dreams. That's how I felt about the vintage brass refractor lying on my workbench, its tarnished tubes and dusty lenses hinting at untold celestial journeys. It had belonged to my daughter, Clara, when she was just a girl, a gift from me before the divorce, a shared window to the stars. She'd dragged it everywhere, exploring the night sky from our backyard, its delicate balance once marred by an accidental fall. A hairline crack I'd painstakingly mended years ago, promising her it would last forever. It seemed forever sometimes needed another repair. I ran a gloved hand along the smooth, cool brass, then the dark, polished mahogany of the mount. Mahogany, not oak. Those unfamiliar with the nuances of aged wood might think they're all the same. They aren't. Each grain holds a different whisper of the past. I smiled faintly, rubbing another coat of beeswax into the rich wood. This old marvel, I mused, still had a few Christmases left in it. The workshop smelled of mineral spirits, fine wood dust, and the robust aroma of dark roast coffee. It was quiet, save for the distant, mournful cry of a foghorn and the low murmur of an old maritime radio, its static-laced broadcast sharing weather updates from distant ports. Retirement had slowed the pace of my mornings, not emptied them, just made them more contemplative. I'd spent a lifetime fixing mechanisms, aligning lenses, bringing distant wonders into focus. It was ironic, I often thought, that I'd spent the last 15 years trying to do the same for my family. Yet no one ever seemed to notice that, either. The hidden compartment took me nearly 3 evenings to perfect. Nothing flashy, just a meticulously carved panel beneath the telescope's base, blending seamlessly with the mahogany grain once closed. The latch clicked with a satisfying, almost imperceptible sound. Unless one knew precisely where to search, it would remain undiscovered. I opened it one last time, my breath catching slightly. Inside, nestled against velvet lining, lay a thick, cream-colored envelope. I checked its contents again. Family photographs, Clara's every Christmas, every birthday, every school play or science fair I'd quietly attended from the back row, careful not to cause tension. Receipts, tuition payments, orthodontist bills, summer camp fees, the down payment for Clara and Michael's first small cottage years ago. I wasn't trying to prove my love for Clara. Love isn't measured in transactions. These receipts merely proved I'd kept my promises, even when others took the credit. Beneath them rested a stack of handwritten letters, one for every year since the divorce. Letters I'd penned but never mailed, words a father thinks but rarely says aloud. For fear of unsettling the precarious peace, I hesitated before placing the final item inside. It was a smaller, carefully folded note, addressed in Clara's mother's elegant script. For Eleanor, Please read carefully. Eleanor had given it to me years ago, after one particularly difficult argument with Victor, almost as an apology, though she'd never quite articulated it as such. And finally, a small, carefully wrapped bundle. It was addressed in careful block letters. For Leo, open when you're older. Clara's little boy, my grandson, had just turned 1. He wouldn't remember this Christmas, but maybe someday he'd understand why his grandfather believed truth could wait, but should never entirely disappear. I closed the envelope, slid it carefully into the compartment, and pressed the panel shut. Click. Perfect. Lastly, I reached beneath the telescope's sturdy tripod leg. A tiny, intricately carved brass key, antique and gleaming, was secured there with fresh, strong tape exactly where I'd planned. Hidden, safe, if everything went as I hoped. I'd show Clara after Christmas dinner. Just the two of us. No speeches, no accusations. There's something inside I think you should have. That was the entire plan. Simple, quiet, like always. 3 days before Christmas, my phone rang while I was sorting through a tray of tiny screws and watchmaker's tools. Hey, Dad. Clara's voice always sounded rushed in December. School concerts, holiday crafts, a 1-year-old who had recently declared sleep optional. Still surviving? I asked, a smile tugging at my lips. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. Barely. I could hear Leo babbling somewhere in the background, followed by a loud metallic clang. Oh no, what was that? He discovered the pots and pans. I chuckled without realizing it. Some sounds never stop being funny. So, she continued, could you bring Leo's Christmas present over a couple of days early? The telescope? Of course, I said, not a second of hesitation. Christmas Eve is going to be crazy. I figured it'd be easier if it's already here. When should I come? Saturday afternoon. I'll be there. And Dad? Yeah? Thank you. She said it casually. The kind of thank you people offer without a second thought. But I did. Parents remembered those little moments, especially after a divorce, especially when your daughter was grown. December 22nd dawned colder than expected. I wrapped the telescope carefully in moving blankets, securing it in the back of my pickup. The drive across town, from Oak Haven's quiet harbor to Clara's suburban home in Willow Creek, took about 30 minutes. Christmas decorations adorned nearly every block. Inflatable snowmen, plastic reindeer, strings of lights hanging askew from gutters. Clara opened the front door before I reached the porch, Leo bouncing in her arms the moment he saw the blanket-covered shape. Easy there, buddy, I laughed. He already thinks every package belongs to him. He's usually right. Michael, Clara's husband, appeared from the kitchen, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. We all shared a laugh. Michael took one end, and I lifted the telescope inside. The living room smelled of cinnamon and fresh pine. Their Christmas tree stood near the front window, half surrounded by wrapped presents. We placed the telescope beside the tree, exactly where Clara wanted it. It looked right, as if it had always belonged there. It turned out beautifully, Arthur, Michael said, kneeling beside it. I shrugged. It cleaned up better than its owner. Clara rolled her eyes. Oh, stop. She ran her fingers gently along the polished mahogany. Dad? Her voice softened. I remember looking through this. You wore grooves into the focus knob, I teased. She smiled. I probably did. Leo leaned toward it immediately, pointing. Papa? Clara laughed. I think he's trying to say star. Maybe. Or maybe not. Either way, hearing that little voice warmed something inside me I hadn't realized had grown cold. Clara hugged me before I left. I'll see you Christmas Eve. Wouldn't miss it. I looked back once as I walked to my truck. The telescope stood beside the glowing Christmas tree, exactly where it was supposed to be. I had no reason to think I'd never move it again. No reason to imagine that before Christmas dinner was over, someone else would already be trying to hide what it contained. And I certainly had no idea that one text message was only 2 days away from changing everything. Christmas Eve morning, I woke before the alarm. It still happened, even in retirement. My body, conditioned by decades of sun-up starts, simply opened my eyes at 5:42 and said, well, let's get moving. The old house felt cold enough that I could feel the chill of the kitchen tiles through my socks. I turned on the coffee maker, stood there listening to it sputter, and gazed out at the backyard as the sky slowly turned a pale gray. My neighbor's inflatable Santa had tipped halfway over during the night, looking as if he'd given up and plunged face first into the frost. For some reason, it made me laugh. Not a big laugh, just enough to make the kitchen feel a little less empty. I had a pecan pie to make. Clara loved my pecan pie because it wasn't overly sweet, just rich and nutty. The kind of dessert nobody bragged about until the plate came back scraped clean. I laid everything out on the counter like I was assembling a complex clock movement. Pecans, brown sugar, butter, eggs, vanilla. One cracked old wooden spoon Eleanor had left behind years ago and never asked for back. I almost put it away, then didn't. Some habits survived longer than marriages. By 10 o'clock, the kitchen windows were fogged from the oven's heat. I wrapped the pie in foil, wrote Arthur, heat 350 on 25th, on a strip of masking tape, and stuck it across the top. Then I just stood there. There are moments in a man's life when the house gets too quiet around him. Christmas Eve could do that. I thought about the telescope already sitting beside Clara's tree. I pictured Leo leaning over it, making that little sound. Papa, I smiled to myself. Maybe by next year, I said to the empty room, you'll have that word figured out. Around noon, I shaved, put on a clean blue button-down shirt, and changed into the nicer jeans Clara always said made me look less like I'd just emerged from a dusty attic. At 4 o'clock, I checked the pie again, though there was nothing to check. At 4:30, I carried it carefully to my truck and started toward Clara's place. I remember feeling proud. That's the part that stings now. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't expecting trouble. I wasn't rehearsing speeches. I was just a father going to his daughter's house for Christmas Eve dinner. Sometimes the thing that breaks you doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it lights up on your phone at a red light. I was about 20 minutes from Clara's house when the message came in. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down. Clara. I expected something ordinary. Can you grab ice? Running behind. Leo spilled juice on himself. Instead, I saw, do not come until you apologize to Victor Sterling. I read it once, then again. The truck behind me honked. I looked up and realized the light had turned green. My hand went to the gear shift and stopped. Apologize? To Victor? For what? I pulled into the parking lot of a closed antique shop and sat there with the engine running. The pecan pie steamed faintly beside me. I called Clara, straight to voicemail. I tried again, nothing. I stared at that message until the words stopped looking like words. Do not come, that was the part I heard loudest. Not call me, not we need to talk, just do not come. 15 years of swallowing explanations of biting back replies rose up in my throat. For one searing second, I almost typed back everything I had paid, everything I had kept quiet. Every time Victor had smiled at family gatherings like he'd carried the whole world on his shoulders, while I stood 3 steps back, pretending not to notice. But then I saw Clara at 16, crying on my porch after the divorce, convinced that loving one parent meant betraying the other. So I put the phone down. I didn't send a word. I turned the truck around. The pecan pie slid against the passenger door when I took the corner too sharply. Easy, I muttered, as if it were alive. Then I drove home. Back at the house, I set the pie on the counter and didn't unwrap it. For a while, I stayed in my coat. I stood in the living room beside my old armchair, watching the colored Christmas lights blink across the window glass. The house smelled of warm pecan and cold sea air. A strange combination. One made you think of family. The other reminded you nobody had come through the door. I opened the freezer and found a frozen shepherd's pie I'd bought on sale sometime in November. The box said family size, which felt like a little joke at my expense. I put it in the oven anyway. While it cooked, I sat in the rocking chair by the front window. Not Leo's telescope. That was at Clara's house, where it belonged. Mine was an old wooden rocker I'd kept for years, the kind that creaked if you shifted wrong. I held the phone in my lap. No new messages. At 6:30, the shepherd's pie was still cold in the middle. I ate the edges, standing over the sink. That was my Christmas Eve dinner. I wish I could tell you I was angry. Anger would have been easier. Mostly, I felt tired. The kind of tired sleep doesn't fix. What I didn't know was that at Clara's house, dinner had started almost on time. Michael later told me the details, and some of them I can still picture too clearly. Clara came downstairs with wet hair and Leo in clean pajamas with little green dinosaurs on them. Her phone had been on the kitchen counter earlier, unlocked, because she'd been following a recipe while trying to bathe Leo after he'd smeared mashed banana in his hair. By the time she got back to the kitchen, Victor Sterling was carving the turkey like he owned the room. Eleanor was setting rolls into a basket. Michael was pouring sparkling cider, and my chair was gone. Not moved to the corner, not squeezed against the wall. Gone from the table entirely. Clara stopped with Leo on her hip. "Where's Dad sitting?" Victor didn't even look up. "He's not coming." "What do you mean he's not coming?" Victor sighed as if the question exhausted him. "I told him we needed an apology first. He made his choice." Clara shifted Leo higher on her hip. "What happened?" "Sweetheart," Victor said, lowering his voice in that polished way of his. "Not tonight." That was Victor's gift. He could make ending a conversation sound like kindness. Eleanor looked down at the rolls. Michael watched Clara's face. Leo pointed toward the living room. "Papa?" Clara's mouth tightened. "Not tonight, baby," Victor chuckled. "He'll survive one Christmas without an audience." Nobody laughed. So Victor laughed a little louder. At dinner, he talked too much. That was what Michael noticed first. Victor told everyone how busy he'd been getting Leo's big gift ready. Clara frowned. "The telescope?" Victor dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "Well, it needed some work. Old mahogany dries out if nobody maintains it." Michael looked across the table. "Mahogany?" Victor paused. "Wood, Michael. You know what I mean." But Michael did know enough to know the difference. After dinner, they moved into the living room. The telescope sat beside the tree, glowing softly under the lights. Leo crawled straight toward it. "A star," he said, again, patting the brass tube. Clara went quiet. Victor lifted Leo onto his shoulders and smiled for pictures. "You see," he said, "Grandpa Victor came through." Michael told me later that was when the room changed for him. Not because of what Victor said, but because of how comfortably he said it, like a man stepping into shoes that already belonged to someone else. Later, when Clara took Leo upstairs and Eleanor started rinsing plates, Michael walked back toward the living room to grab his sweater. That's when he saw Victor crouched beside the telescope. At first, Michael thought he was picking up wrapping paper. Then Victor glanced over his shoulder. Quick, guilty. His hand moved under the base of the telescope mount. There was a small ripping sound. Tape coming loose. Victor slipped something into the pocket of his red Christmas sweater, stood up too fast, and nearly bumped the tree. Michael froze in the hallway. Victor saw him. For one long second, neither man said a word. Then Victor smiled, a little too widely. "Low something?" Michael asked. Victor patted his sweater pocket. "No," he said, "just fixing a loose edge." But his face had gone pale around the mouth. And Michael, calm as ever, looked from Victor to the telescope and knew something under that mount was worth hiding. Christmas morning is supposed to feel softer. Even when you're grown, even when the kids have kids of their own, there's usually a hush to it. Wrapping paper on the floor, coffee brewing, somebody wearing slippers they got 10 minutes earlier. At Clara's house, that morning started with Leo banging a plastic spoon against the tray of his high chair. Michael was the first one downstairs. He told me later he hadn't slept much, not because of Christmas excitement. He was 42, a financial analyst, and not exactly the type to lie awake waiting for Santa Claus. He kept seeing Victor's hand under that telescope, the quick glance over his shoulder, the little ripping sound, the way Victor had patted his sweater pocket and said, "Just fixing a loose edge." Men like Michael noticed details most people walk past. That was his job. Numbers either matched or they didn't. Stories either balanced or they didn't. And Victor's story had started running a deficit around dessert. Clara was still upstairs getting Leo dressed when Michael stepped into the living room with his coffee. The tree lights were still on from the night before, glowing weakly in the gray morning. The telescope sat beside the lower branches, exactly where I'd left it on December 22nd. Leo's little hands had already smudged the shine on the brass tube. Michael crouched beside it. He didn't touch anything at first. He just looked. The base of the mount was smooth, no loose edge, no broken trim, no piece hanging off the way Victor had implied. Then Michael ran one finger underneath. The tape was gone. That stopped him cold. He stood up slowly, looked toward the stairs, then toward the kitchen. Clara called down, "Coffee still hot?" "Yeah," he answered too quickly. "I think so." He didn't tell her, not yet. He wasn't hiding it to protect Victor. He was trying to protect Clara from one more Christmas morning turning into a battlefield before he even knew what he'd found. That was Michael. Careful first, then certain. The garage was colder than the house by a good 15 degrees. Michael slipped out there after breakfast, saying he was looking for extra trash bags. Clara didn't question him. Leo had just discovered that torn wrapping paper could be worn as a hat, and she was busy laughing for the first time since the night before. Victor and Eleanor hadn't come over yet. That mattered. Michael wanted a few minutes, without Victor's polished voice filling the room. The garage smelled like cardboard boxes, old paint, and winter air. He checked the shelf by the door first. Nothing. Then the workbench. Nothing. He moved slower after that, not like a man searching for trash bags, but like a man retracing somebody else's steps. Near the corner sat a tall plastic bin where Clara stored holiday tablecloths and extra bows. On the floor beside it was a little red fuzz, one thread, from a Christmas sweater. Michael stared at it, then he knelt. Behind the bin, near the concrete wall, something caught the light. A tiny brass key. It had slid partly under a flattened cardboard box. Michael picked it up between two fingers, small, old-fashioned. Not something that belonged to a modern toy. He closed his hand around it and stayed crouched there for a moment. Because once you find a key, you already know there's a lock. And once you know there's a lock, you have to decide whether you're ready for whatever it opens. Michael waited until Clara put Leo down for his nap. That was around 1. The house had gone quiet, except for the dishwasher, and the soft creak of branches against the front window. Clara came into the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What are you doing?" Michael was kneeling beside the telescope again. He looked up at her. "I need to show you something." Her face changed before he said another word, maybe because of his tone, maybe because people who love each other can hear bad news before it arrives. "What?" He opened his palm. The brass key sat there. Clara frowned. "What is that?" "I found it in the garage." "Okay, I saw Victor take something from under the telescope last night." She blinked once. "Michael." "I know. No, Michael, listen. Please don't start something. It's Christmas. I'm not starting anything." He kept his voice low. "That's the problem, Clara. Something already started." She looked toward the stairs. "Leo's sleeping." "I know." "Then why are we doing this right now?" "Because your father didn't come last night. Victor claimed he restored this telescope. Then he took a hidden key from it and lied to my face." Clara's fingers tightened around the dish towel. "That doesn't mean—" "I didn't say what it means." He held out the key. "I'm saying there's a reason he didn't want us finding this." Clara stared at the telescope. I wish I could have seen her face then. Not because I wanted her hurt, God no. But because that was the first crack in a wall I had spent 15 years quietly standing behind. She whispered, "Where would it even go?" Michael ran his hand along the base, then beneath it. He pressed lightly in 3 places before something gave. A soft click. Clara took 1 step back. The panel loosened so cleanly it looked impossible. Michael lifted it open. Inside was the cream-colored envelope. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Clara covered her mouth. "That's Dad's handwriting." Michael didn't reach for it right away. He looked at her first. "Do you want me to stop?" She shook her head, but not like she was brave, like she already knew stopping would be worse. "Open it." They didn't read it in the living room. That would have felt too exposed, Michael said. Too close to the tree. Too close to Leo's toys. Too close to the place Victor had posed for pictures, pretending the gift was his. They carried the envelope to the kitchen table, the same kitchen where my empty chair had been discussed like an inconvenience. Clara sat down slowly. Michael slid the contents out. Photographs came first. Clara at 9 in a blue winter coat outside a school concert. Clara at 12 holding a science fair ribbon. Clara at 16 standing beside Eleanor in front of the Willow Creek High School sign. Clara frowned. "I don't remember him being there." Michael turned one over. On the back in my handwriting it said, "Didn't come inside." Didn't want to make it harder for her. Proud of her anyway. Clara pressed her fingertips to her lips. Another photo. Clara's college move-in day. Taken from across a parking lot. She laughed once, but it broke halfway through. He was there? Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. The receipts came next, neatly clipped by year. Tuition deposits, orthodontist bills, emergency room copays, summer camp registration, car insurance. A closing cost statement from years before, when Clara and Michael bought their first small house. Clara picked that one up with a shaky hand. No, she said. Michael leaned closer. What? She swallowed. Victor said he helped with this. Michael looked at the paper. My God. No, he said. He said Mom and Victor wanted to help us get started. She turned the page as though the numbers might change if she looked hard enough. My name was there, not Victor's. Mine. The letters came last. 15 Christmas letters bundled with a rubber band. Clara touched them like they might burn her. Dad wrote all these? Michael nodded. She opened the top one, only read 3 lines before she had to stop. Her shoulders folded inward. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a quiet collapse like her body finally understood something her mind was still fighting. Michael moved beside her and put a hand on her back. She whispered, Why didn't he tell me? Michael said, Maybe he thought silence was protecting you. Clara closed her eyes, and who did it protect? Neither of them spoke after that, because the answer was already sitting between them. The strongest thing in that envelope wasn't a receipt. It was Eleanor's old letter. Clara recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. The paper had yellowed at the edges. She opened it with both hands. Michael watched her read. Halfway down the page, Clara's chin started trembling. Eleanor had written it years earlier, after the divorce. She thanked me for helping with Clara's expenses. Thanked me for not forcing Clara into adult problems. Thanked me for letting her have peace, even when it cost you credit you deserve. Clara put the letter flat on the table. Then she stood up, walked to the sink, gripped the edge. Her knuckles went white. Michael came up behind her but didn't touch her right away. She said, He let me believe Victor was the steady one. Her voice was barely above a whisper. All these years. Michael said, Clara, no. She shook her head. No, I did that, too. I believed it because it was easier. A car door closed outside. Both of them froze. Through the kitchen window, Michael saw Victor's sedan in the driveway. Clara wiped her face fast, almost angrily. Michael gathered the photographs, receipts, letters, and Eleanor's letter into a neat stack. He did not put them back inside the telescope. The envelope stayed on the kitchen table. The brass key lay beside it. Victor walked in through the side door without knocking, smiling like a man arriving to applause. Merry Christmas, he called. Then he saw the table. The smile slipped, just a little, but enough. Clara turned toward him with wet eyes and my Christmas letter still in her hand. And for the first time in 15 years, Victor Sterling had no prepared story ready. Victor stood in Clara's kitchen with one hand still on the side door, smiling at evidence he didn't expect to see. That smile lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then his eyes moved across the table. Photographs, receipts, letters, Eleanor's old letter, the brass key. All of it spread out under the yellow kitchen light like somebody had taken 15 years and laid them flat. Clara didn't speak right away. That was what made him nervous. Victor knew how to handle crying. He knew how to handle anger. He could soften his voice, touch a shoulder, make himself sound wounded. But silence? Silence left him no wall to push against. He cleared his throat. Well, he said, forcing a chuckle, looks like Arthur finally decided to make Christmas about himself. Clara's fingers tightened around my letter. Michael stood beside the table, calm as stone. Careful, Michael said. Victor looked at him. Excuse me? I said be careful. Victor's face tightened. Clara lifted one photograph. Did you know he was there? At my science fair? Victor glanced at it like it was a parking ticket. I don't remember every little school event from 20 years ago. It says he didn't come inside because he didn't want to make it harder for me. Victor waved a hand. That sounds like Arthur. Always dramatic from a distance. Clara flinched, but she didn't fold. Not this time. She picked up the closing cost statement next. You told me you and Mom helped us with this. Victor looked toward the hallway like he expected Eleanor to appear and rescue him. She knew your father contributed some things. Some things, Clara's voice cracked, but she kept going. Tuition, insurance, medical bills, camp, the down payment help. Victor, this isn't some things. His jaw moved. For the first time, Victor didn't answer fast enough. Michael noticed. Clara noticed too. Finally, Victor sighed like he was the one being mistreated. All right, yes, Arthur paid for certain expenses. Clara stared at him. And you let me believe you did. I never said every dollar came from me. You let me believe it. Victor leaned on the back of a chair. I let you believe what kept this family peaceful. That sentence changed the room. Clara set the paper down slowly. No, she whispered. You let me believe what made you look good. Victor's face hardened. You have no idea what it was like dealing with your father after the divorce. Michael said, don't change the subject. Victor snapped, this is family business. I'm her husband, and I'm the man who raised her. Clara's head came up. No, she said, one word, small, but it landed hard. Victor blinked. Clara wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand. You were in my life, you helped raise me. I won't pretend you didn't. But you don't get to erase Dad because it makes you feel bigger. Victor's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For once, he had no polished sentence ready. Nobody slept much that night. Clara kept the envelope on the kitchen table. She didn't put it back inside the telescope. She couldn't. The telescope stayed in the living room beside the tree, quiet and bright, while everything around it started falling apart. Eleanor came over later that evening after Clara called her. Michael said she walked in pale, still wearing her winter coat, and when she saw her old letter on the table, she sat down like her knees had given out. Oh, Clara, she said. You knew? Eleanor's eyes filled. I knew your father helped. I didn't know Victor was taking credit for it. Victor stood near the counter with his arms crossed. Eleanor. She turned on him. Don't. That one word from her surprised everybody, maybe even herself. Clara looked from one parent to the other. I spent years thinking Dad just stepped back. Eleanor covered her mouth. He stepped back because I asked him not to make you choose. Clara's face twisted. Mom, I thought I was protecting you. Clara laughed once, and it sounded nothing like joy. Everybody keeps saying that. The kitchen went quiet again. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires crunching over old frost. Inside, Leo stirred on the baby monitor, made one soft sound, then settled. That little noise broke Clara. She turned away from all of them, pressed both hands to the counter, and cried without trying to make it pretty. Michael went to her. Victor didn't, and that, more than anything, told Michael who Victor really was. So the next morning, December 26th, Victor tried to rebuild the lie. That's what men like him do. They don't apologize first. They explain. Clara had barely poured coffee when Victor arrived again, carrying bakery muffins nobody wanted. He set the box on the counter. I think emotions ran too high last night. Clara didn't touch the coffee. Michael leaned against the sink, arms folded. Victor looked at the table. The envelope was still there, the brass key still beside it. His eyes flickered toward it. Clara saw that. I want the truth, she said. Victor exhaled. You have pieces of it. No, I have Dad's receipts, Dad's letters, Mom's letter. I want your truth. Victor's voice softened. Sweetheart, your father never corrected anyone. Clara stared at him. What? He had chances, birthdays, graduations, Christmases. He could have spoken up. He chose not to. Michael said that doesn't explain you taking credit. Victor's hand tightened around the edge of the muffin box. I did what fathers do. I kept things stable. Clara's face went still. You knew. Victor hesitated. Too long. You knew he paid those bills, she said. I knew he contributed. You knew the whole time? Victor looked away. That was the admission. Not clean, not honest. Forced out by the weight of papers he couldn't talk around anymore. Clara sat down slowly. Her voice dropped. Then why did Dad not come on Christmas Eve? Victor straightened. I told you, he refused to apologize. For what? Victor blinked. For his attitude. What attitude? You know how he is. No, I don't, because apparently nobody let me know him. Michael stepped forward. Did you talk to Arthur that night? Victor's mouth tightened. I sent a message. Clara looked up. You sent a message? Victor's face changed. Just a flicker. But enough. I mean, the message was sent. Clara reached for her phone on the counter. Victor took one step toward her. Clara, don't turn this into some investigation. Michael moved between them without raising his voice. Stay there. Clara's hands shook as she opened her messages. The thread with me showed only my earlier messages from December 22nd. Nothing from Christmas Eve, no argument, no apology demand, no reply from me. Her breathing changed. I didn't delete anything. Michael came beside her. Check recently deleted. She looked at him. I don't even know if I do. It took less than a minute. 1 minute to undo 15 years. There it was. A deleted text. Timestamp 5:30 p.m. Christmas Eve. Sent from Clara's phone. Do not come until you apologize to Victor Sterling. Clara stared at the screen. Then she looked at Victor. Not confused anymore. Not doubtful. Empty. Victor lifted both hands. Clara, listen to me. You used my phone. You were overwhelmed. Leo was crying. I was trying to avoid a scene. You used my phone. Her voice rose on the second one, sharp enough that Leo began crying upstairs. Eleanor covered her face. Michael whispered, I'll get him. But Clara shook her head. No, I'll go. She walked past Victor like he wasn't there. Halfway up the stairs, she stopped. Without turning around, she said, You made me hurt my father. Victor said nothing. The baby cried harder. Clara kept climbing. And downstairs beside the untouched muffins and the open envelope, Victor finally looked afraid. The next morning, December 27th, Michael called me. I was in my workshop, cleaning tools that were already clean. When my phone rang and I saw his name, something in my chest tightened. Arthur? He said. Michael. There was a pause. Then he said, We found the compartment. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I could smell mahogany dust and coffee again. Clara knows? She knows enough. I sat down on the shop stool. Is she all right? No, Michael said quietly, but she wants to be. That nearly broke me more than the text had. Before I could answer, headlights swept across my workshop window. A car pulled into my driveway. Not Clara's. Not Michael's. Victor Sterling stepped out, buttoning his coat against the cold. Michael was still on the line. Arthur? He asked. I watched Victor walk toward my door. I'll have to call you back, I said. Then the doorbell rang. When Victor Sterling showed up at my door on December 27th, I knew before he opened his mouth that he hadn't come to apologize. Men who come to apologize stand differently. They look smaller somehow. Victor stood on my porch with his shoulders squared, his wool coat buttoned neat. And that same public smile he used at town hall meetings and charity fundraisers. The one that said he was reasonable, respectable, and prepared to forgive me for making things uncomfortable. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Arthur, he said. Victor. Cold air moved between us. Behind me, the workshop smelled like metal tools and old sawdust. Behind him, his sedan idled in my driveway, exhaust drifting white under the gray morning sky. He glanced past my shoulder. We should talk inside. No. His smile tightened. All right, fine. I'll be brief. That was the first lie. He wasn't brief. He started with bargaining. Clara's upset. You know how emotional she gets when family pressure piles up. I said nothing. He shifted his weight. This doesn't have to become ugly. We can all sit down, explain things carefully, and move forward. You don't want Leo growing up around bitterness, do you? There it was. A baby used like a shield. I kept one hand on the doorframe. What exactly are you asking me to do? Victor's eyes narrowed a little. He didn't like direct questions. I'm asking you to be mature. I see. Tell Clara this was a misunderstanding. Tell her you should have spoken up years ago. I'll acknowledge some confusion about expenses. Confusion? He heard my tone and tried another road. I can reimburse you for some of it. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so small. 15 years of silence, a daughter's trust, Christmas Eve alone with frozen shepherd's pie, and Victor thought the problem had a dollar amount. I looked at him for a long moment. You think I kept receipts because I wanted repayment? His face flushed. I'm trying to solve this. No, you're trying to survive it. For the first time, his polished mask slipped all the way. You always did this, he said, voice low, acting noble, standing back, letting everyone think you were above the mess. I stood back because Clara was a child, and now you get to play the wounded saint. I opened the door wider, not to welcome him, but to make it clear the conversation was ending. You sent that text from her phone. His jaw clenched. She would have sent it eventually. No, Victor, she wouldn't have. He looked away first. That told me everything I needed. Then came the emotional blackmail. If you blow this family apart, that's on you. I stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under my shoes. I didn't expose you. I didn't call Clara. I didn't show up waving papers at Christmas dinner. He stared at me. I built a telescope for my grandson, I said. That's all I did. His mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. So I gave him the only answer I had left. You should go. He stood there another few seconds, waiting for the old Arthur to make things easier. The old Arthur didn't. Finally, he walked back to his car. I watched him leave, and for the first time in 15 years, silence didn't feel like surrender. January 2nd was Clara's idea. She called me the night before. Not Michael, not Eleanor, Clara. When I saw her name, I had to sit down before answering. Hi, Dad. That was all she said at first. 2 words. But I heard the little girl who used to stand in my workshop wearing pink rain boots, asking if she could help me polish lenses. Hi, sweetheart, she cried then quietly. I let her. After a while, she said, I'm having Christmas dinner tomorrow, a late one. I looked toward the dark kitchen. That's nice. I want you there early, not tolerated, not squeezed in, not called after everyone else had arrived, early. My throat tightened. All right, and Dad? Yeah, I'm not asking you to make a speech. I don't have one. I know. She breathed out shakily. That's why I need you there. When I arrived the next afternoon, my chair was at the table. Not just any chair, mine. The same wooden dining chair Clara had always placed near the kitchen entrance, because I liked having a little room for my bad knee. I noticed it before I noticed anything else. Clara saw me notice. Her eyes filled, but she didn't rush me. Leo was on the floor in the living room, pushing a toy truck into the leg of the telescope. The telescope sat beside the tree, still polished, still steady. The envelope was back inside it now, Clara told me later. But the brass key lay on the coffee table, plain as daylight. Victor arrived last. Of course he did. Eleanor came in before him, pale and quiet. She hugged me at the door and held on longer than she ever had after the divorce. I'm sorry, she whispered. I said, I know. That was all either of us could manage. Dinner began politely, too politely. Forks touched plates, glasses were passed. Leo dropped a roll and laughed like he'd invented comedy. Then Clara stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shake papers in anyone's face. She simply walked to the coffee table, picked up the brass key, and held it in her palm. I need everyone to understand why Dad wasn't here on Christmas Eve. Victor set down his fork. Clara, not now. She looked at him. Yes, now. No one moved. Michael sat beside her, steady and silent. Clara opened the telescope compartment and removed the envelope. Piece by piece, she laid out the truth. The photographs, the receipts, the letters, Eleanor's old note. She didn't embellish. She didn't accuse beyond what the evidence showed. That made it worse for Victor, because there was no drama for him to attack. Only paper, dates, handwriting, facts. When she reached the deleted text, Victor pushed back his chair. I won't sit here and be humiliated. Clara looked tired when she answered. Then don't. He stared at her. For one terrible second, I thought she might soften. Old habits are stubborn things, but she didn't. Victor looked around the table, searching for one person willing to rescue him. No one did. So, he left. The front door closed hard enough to rattle the wreath. Leo startled. I picked him up before thinking. He settled against my chest, one hand gripping my shirt. Pa, he mumbled. Clara covered her mouth, and this time, nobody corrected him. Healing did not happen that night. I don't want to lie about that. Clara apologized. Yes, she cried. I cried too, though I turned my face toward the window because some habits take longer to die. But trust doesn't rebuild just because the truth finally gets invited to dinner. It came back in small pieces. Coffee on Saturdays, a call on a Tuesday because Leo had a fever, and Clara wanted to know what I used to do when she was little. A trip to the hardware store where Michael asked me which drill set was worth buying, then actually listened. Eleanor and I had one hard conversation in a diner off Harbor Road. She admitted she had chosen peace so often that she stopped asking who was paying for it. I told her I had done the same. Neither of us left proud, but we left honest. More of Victor's lies surfaced over the next few months. Nothing as big as the text, but enough. Stories polished too smooth, credit taken too easily, apologies avoided like potholes. Clara stopped calling him Dad Victor, then stopped calling him much at all. I never told her what to do. That was her road to walk. Mine was simpler. Show up. Answer the phone. Hold Leo when he reached for me. Let Clara see that love didn't need a performance to be real. The next Christmas, I arrived at Clara's house before noon. She had asked me to. The porch smelled like pine and cold air. Inside, homemade shepherd's pie bubbled in the oven, not frozen. Homemade. Clara smiled when she saw me looking at it. I figured you deserved a better Christmas Eve dinner this year. I swallowed hard. Leo came running from the living room faster than his little legs could manage. Grandpa. He hit my knees with both arms. Behind him, the telescope stood beside his own little Christmas tree. The envelope tucked safely back inside. The brass key now on my key ring. At the dining table, my chair was waiting. No speech, no drama. Just a place. Clara walked over, touched my sleeve, and said one word. Dad. And that was when I finally understood. I hadn't lost my daughter that Christmas Eve. I had only stopped protecting the lie that stood between us.